The Great Soybean Shift: How America Lost Its Biggest Customer. When autumn arrived this past August across America's heartland, something felt fundamentally different in the vast soybean fields stretching from Illinois to Iowa. For generations, this period marked the beginning of harvest season, a time typically filled with anticipation and careful planning. But as combines rolled through the Midwest, an unsettling silence hung over the farming communities. The optimism that usually accompanies the harvest had been replaced by uncertainty and growing concern. The source of this anxiety wasn't a natural disaster or crop failure. Instead, it stemmed from something far more troubling: a complete absence of orders from China, historically America's most important agricultural trading partner. By mid-August, when Chinese buyers would typically have already secured contracts worth billions of dollars for the coming year's soybean supply, American farmers found themselves staring at empty order books. Not a single ton had been purchased by Chinese importers. This unprecedented situation sent shockwaves through agricultural communities across multiple states. According to figures released by the American Soybean Association, the reality on the ground painted an even grimmer picture. Approximately 7 million tons of soybeans were sitting idle in storage facilities across the country, accumulating storage fees with each passing day and no buyers in sight. Market prices had collapsed to levels not seen in years, and farmers faced a nightmarish scenario. If buyers didn't materialize soon, millions of dollars worth of crops could deteriorate in warehouses or become livestock feed at catastrophic losses. To understand the magnitude of this crisis, consider China's historical role in American agriculture. For over 2 decades, China has been the dominant force driving U.S. soybean exports. In 2024 alone, Chinese purchases reached 22 million tons of American soybeans, representing roughly 1/3 of all U.S. soybean exports. These weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They represented the livelihoods of hundreds of thousands of farming families across the American heartland. Now, farmers throughout the Midwest find themselves confronting a harsh reality. The harvest they've spent months nurturing and significant capital cultivating may result in financial losses rather than profits. The question everyone's asking is straightforward yet profound. How did the United States go from exporting over 20 million tons of soybeans to China to receiving virtually zero orders? And perhaps more importantly, who has stepped in to fill the void left by American suppliers? The foundation of American soybean dominance. To appreciate the current crisis, we need to understand what American soybean agriculture represents on the global stage. McLean County, Illinois, embodies everything that made U.S. soybeans a worldwide commodity powerhouse. Driving through this region, you encounter landscape after landscape of rich, fertile farmland, seemingly endless fields of green stretching to the horizon. This single county has consistently held the distinction of being the world's highest producing soybean region, a testament to both the quality of the land and the expertise of American farmers. The economic footprint of U.S. soybean production extends far beyond the fields themselves. In 2024, American soybean exports generated revenues of $24.6 billion, accounting for 14% of the nation's entire agricultural export portfolio. Year after year, American soybeans command approximately 30% of global market share, making the United States the world's second-largest exporter, trailing only Brazil. But the impact reaches deeper than export statistics suggest. Economic research indicates that America's soybean sector contributes at least $40 billion annually to the overall economy when you factor in all the interconnected industries. This massive economic engine supports tens of thousands of jobs distributed across diverse sectors, from family farms and rural communities to processing facilities, commodity traders, transportation networks, and port operations. Together, these elements form an intricate and highly developed industrial ecosystem that has taken generations to build. Within this global landscape, China emerged as the cornerstone customer. Beginning in the year 2000, China consistently purchased nearly half of all U.S. soybean exports, maintaining this remarkable trade relationship for more than 20 consecutive years. This wasn't accidental. It was built on solid economic and practical foundations. American soybeans offered several compelling advantages that made them attractive to Chinese buyers. The quality remained remarkably consistent across harvests, with protein and oil content precisely calibrated for both animal feed applications and food processing industries. The supply chain infrastructure connecting American farms to international ports operated with impressive efficiency, ensuring timely deliveries and minimal disruptions. Additionally, American agricultural research and innovation kept pushing boundaries, continuously improving both yield potential and quality standards. Perhaps most strategically significant, the timing of the American harvest created a perfect complement to global supply cycles. U.S. soybeans reach maturity and enter the market in autumn, precisely when supplies from South America's spring harvest have been depleted. This natural timing advantage meant American soybeans filled a critical gap in China's year-round procurement needs. The numbers from 2024 tell the story clearly. China purchased 22 million tons of U.S. soybeans valued at approximately $12.6 billion. That single relationship accounted for more than half of America's total soybean export volume. For American farmers, particularly those in the Midwest, China's enormous and consistent demand wasn't just important, it was fundamental to their financial planning, loan repayments, and long-term business viability. This explains why farming communities across states like Illinois, Iowa, North Dakota, and Minnesota hoped desperately to preserve this long-standing trade relationship. Losing access to the Chinese market wouldn't simply mean finding alternative buyers. It would mean losing access to nearly half of global soybean demand, something no other combination of markets could realistically replace. The collapse, when the orders stopped coming. But then, almost overnight in commercial terms, the situation changed dramatically. Chinese buyers, who had been reliable partners for decades, effectively vanished from the American soybean market. Those familiar with agricultural trade patterns knew this represented something far more serious than typical market fluctuations. In normal years, by this point in the calendar, Chinese importers would have already secured substantial contracts with American farmers. Historically, before the October harvest even begins, Chinese purchases typically represented about 14% of the entire year's expected volume. This advance ordering provided American farmers with crucial certainty as they made decisions about harvest logistics, storage, and financial planning. This year told a completely different story. The United States received virtually no new orders from Chinese buyers. During the first half of 2025, America's soybean exports to China totaled less than 3 million tons, the lowest level recorded in nearly 20 years. To put this in perspective, this represents an almost 90% decline from typical volumes. The immediate impact has been devastating. Approximately 30% of the U.S. soybean crop currently has no committed buyers, leaving an estimated 500,000 soybean farmers facing dramatically reduced income from a full year of labor and investment. For many, the situation is even more dire. They're not just earning less, they're operating at a loss. Understanding the severity requires recognizing what soybeans represent to these farming operations. For most farmers across the Midwest, soybeans constitute their primary revenue source. This income doesn't just provide profit, it's essential for repaying operating loans, covering land rental agreements, purchasing next season's seeds and supplies, and maintaining expensive farm equipment. When cash flow breaks down in agriculture, the consequences cascade rapidly into the next planting cycle, potentially creating a spiral that threatens the long-term viability of family farms that have operated for generations. The storage situation compounds the financial pressure. With soybeans remaining unsold, farmers must shoulder additional costs for warehousing and proper climate management. Agricultural products are not inert commodities. They require specific storage conditions to maintain quality. If humidity, temperature, or pest control aren't managed precisely, the crop's value can deteriorate rapidly. For farmers already operating on thin margins, these unexpected storage expenses represent another financial blow. Political pressure and desperate appeals. Given the political landscape, this agricultural crisis quickly attracted attention at the highest levels of government. Former President Trump, who had returned to office with strong support from agricultural states, found himself unable to ignore the growing distress in America's farming communities. After all, farmers represent a critical component of his political coalition, particularly in pivotal states like North Dakota, Iowa, Nebraska, and Illinois. When export markets collapse and farmer incomes plummet, electoral consequences inevitably follow. Rural discontent translates directly into lost votes and weakened political support. In an unusual move attempting to break the deadlock, on August 10th, the president took to social media with a direct appeal. He publicly called on China to quadruple its soybean purchases from the United States, promising expedited service and smooth transactions. The message represented a rare instance of a sitting president directly soliciting foreign buyers for a specific American commodity. The response from China was notably measured. 11 days passed without any official reaction or indication that Chinese buyers would alter their purchasing patterns. The silence itself communicated volumes about the changed dynamics of this once reliable trading relationship. As the situation grew increasingly urgent with harvest season approaching, Caleb Ragland, chairman of the American Soybean Association, took direct action by sending a formal letter to the White House. His communication didn't mince words about the severity of the crisis facing American agriculture. Ragland outlined how farmers' cash flow systems were approaching collapse. The harvest was imminent, soybean prices continued their downward slide, while simultaneously the costs for essential inputs, fertilizer, diesel fuel, equipment repairs, and loan interest kept climbing. The tone of the letter bordered on desperation, urging the administration to immediately remove tariffs imposed on China so that normal soybean purchasing could resume. The association's detailed report confirmed that nearly 7 million tons of soybeans were accumulating in warehouses nationwide, while spot market prices had fallen to historically low levels. Without buyers materializing quickly, Ragland warned, the most likely outcome would be millions of tons of soybeans rotting in storage or being diverted to low-value uses like animal feed, representing catastrophic losses for American farmers. The root cause: tariffs as a trade weapon. This naturally raises the fundamental question: why has China, after more than 20 years of reliable purchasing, suddenly stopped buying American soybeans? The answer traces directly to the tariff policies implemented by the Trump administration. Since returning to office, President Trump has pursued an aggressive trade stance, repeatedly increasing tariffs on imports from countries around the world. China, predictably, was not exempted from this approach. In April of this year, the United States imposed tariffs on Chinese goods reaching as high as 145%, justified by the administration as a response to the fentanyl crisis. The Chinese government's retaliation came swiftly and strategically. American soybeans were immediately added to China's retaliatory tariff list. A 25% tariff wall effectively eliminated the competitive advantage U.S. soybeans had built over decades. Their combination of high quality and competitive pricing suddenly became irrelevant when buyers had to pay a 25% premium. By mid-year, recognizing the mutual economic damage being inflicted, both sides engaged in multiple rounds of negotiations aimed at de-escalating trade tensions. These discussions eventually produced a temporary agreement, a 90-day suspension of reciprocal tariffs. During this window, soybean tariffs were reduced to 10%, still significant, but potentially manageable. However, as anyone following international trade understands, such agreements provide neither long-term certainty nor stability. A 90-day pause amounts to nothing more than a temporary breathing space, and policy reversals can occur with minimal warning. From the perspective of Chinese buyers, Rushing to place large orders during this uncertain window carries enormous risk. If tariffs suddenly spike again after they've committed to purchases, they face massive financial losses. This uncertainty fundamentally altered the risk calculation for Chinese importers. Why commit billions of dollars to American soybeans when the tariff situation could change within weeks? The rational business decision became to seek more stable, predictable suppliers. Some observers have asked a seemingly logical question. If China isn't buying, why doesn't the United States simply find new customers for its soybeans? Well, the reality of global agricultural markets makes this far more complicated than it might appear. International commodity orders are typically negotiated months, sometimes even a full year, in advance. Agricultural buyers make purchasing decisions based on long-term planning for their processing facilities, livestock feed requirements, and food production needs. You just can't simply redirect millions of tons of soybeans to new markets on short notice. The logistics, financing, and relationship infrastructure just aren't there. More fundamentally, finding any single buyer, or even a combination of buyers, with the scale and consistency that China represented is virtually impossible. No other market comes close to matching China's enormous and steady demand for imported soybeans. Consider Europe, for instance. Due to significant dietary and cultural differences, demand for soy-based products across European markets remains relatively limited. Most European consumers have traditionally preferred dairy milk over soy milk, and this preference has proven remarkably resistant to change. The soybeans that Europe does import go primarily toward livestock feed for its meat and dairy industries. But even in this sector, European demand pales in comparison to China's. During the 2023 and 2024 marketing years, total American soybean exports to the entire European Union amounted to less than 1/10 of what was sold to China. Europe simply cannot absorb the volume of soybeans that China purchased annually. Australia presents even more limited opportunities. Thanks to its extensive natural pasture land, Australia's livestock sector relies heavily on grass-based feeding systems and domestic grain production. The country maintains near self-sufficiency in animal feed. Consequently, Australia's demand for imported U.S. soybeans is practically negligible, barely registering in export statistics. Since Western markets clearly cannot absorb America's surplus soybean production, could India potentially serve as an alternative destination? The U.S.-India relationship this year has been characterized by prolonged tensions over trade policy. Beyond India's continued purchases of Russian oil, which has frustrated American policymakers, a more fundamental sticking point has emerged. India's consistent refusal to open its agricultural and dairy sectors to American imports. Understanding India's position requires recognizing its economic structure. Despite rapid industrialization in recent years, India remains fundamentally an agricultural economy. Outside major urban centers like Mumbai, Delhi, and Bangalore, vast rural areas dominate the landscape, where most farming still operates under traditional, family-based smallholder systems. Compared to America's highly mechanized, industrial-scale agriculture, Indian farm operations exist on an entirely different scale. The productivity, efficiency, and cost structures are simply incomparable. If inexpensive American soybeans were permitted to flood the Indian market, they would deliver a devastating blow to India's domestic agricultural sector, potentially displacing millions of small farmers. This explains why Prime Minister Modi's government has been willing to engage in direct confrontation with the Trump administration on this issue. Even facing American tariffs as high as 50% on Indian goods, India has held firm, refusing to compromise on agricultural market access. For the Modi government, protecting domestic farmers represents both an economic and political imperative that overrides pressure from the United States. Given this context, India clearly will not emerge as a significant buyer of American soybeans in any foreseeable time frame. Yet while American soybeans sit in warehouses, recent shipping reports tell a very different story. Across the Pacific Ocean, vessels loaded with soybeans are departing ports and heading directly toward China. So what's actually happening? The reality is straightforward. As China reduced its purchases from the United States, it dramatically shifted its soybean imports toward Brazil. According to official data from China's General Administration of Customs, in 2024, China imported approximately 105 million tons of soybeans total. Of this massive volume, a staggering 74.65 million tons originated from Brazil, representing a 6.7% increase compared to the previous year. Even more significantly, China has already secured its future supply. Orders for September and October 2025 have been finalized, roughly 8 million tons scheduled for September delivery, with an additional 4 million tons for October. In essence, virtually every order that the United States lost has been captured by Brazilian suppliers. This raises the obvious question: why has Brazil proven so successful in replacing American soybeans in the Chinese market? The first factor is straightforward economics: price. Take February 2025 as an example. Brazilian soybeans were offered for export at $420 per ton, while U.S. soybeans cost $451 per ton. That $31 difference might seem modest, but when you're purchasing millions of tons, the savings become enormous. For Chinese buyers operating on commercial principles, the price advantage alone justified shifting to Brazilian suppliers. But price tells only part of the story. China has made substantial strategic investments in Brazilian infrastructure specifically designed to facilitate this trade relationship. Over $20 billion has been invested in constructing new ports and railway networks throughout Brazil's agricultural regions. These infrastructure improvements have dramatically enhanced logistics efficiency, reducing transportation bottlenecks that previously limited Brazil's export capacity. Today, thanks to these investments, the cost of shipping soybeans from Brazilian ports to China has actually fallen below the cost of shipping from U.S. Gulf Coast terminals, a remarkable logistical achievement that further tilts the competitive balance toward Brazil. Beyond infrastructure, Brazil has pursued a sophisticated market strategy. The Brazilian government launched a Soybeans to China initiative aimed at establishing comprehensive quality standards that are traceable, environmentally certified, and compliance verified. This program addresses Chinese concerns about sustainability and product integrity, increasingly important factors in international agricultural trade. According to the implementation timeline, a Chinese inspection delegation is scheduled to visit Brazil before year's end to conduct on-site evaluations and sign a bilateral certification agreement. This clearly signals that China views its relationship with Brazil not as a temporary substitution, but as a long-term strategic partnership designed to create an entirely new, reliable supply ecosystem independent of American sources. In addition to its deepening relationship with Brazil, China has taken another significant step, restarting its soybean import program from Argentina after a period of limited activity. Last month, the first shipment under this renewed arrangement, 30,000 tons, prepared for departure toward Guangzhou port. The negotiated price for this cargo was approximately $360 per ton, while comparable U.S. soybeans were trading around $440 per ton. That $80 differential represents a substantial savings, even accounting for any differences in quality or logistics. While this initial order may seem relatively modest in scale, it represents something potentially far more significant: a proof of concept. If large-scale purchases from Argentina materialize in the future, China could realize savings measured in billions of dollars annually. Argentine farmers, recognizing the enormous opportunity, have made remarkable public commitments. Some have stated directly to media outlets, "No matter how much China needs, we can supply it, and we won't raise prices." This kind of explicit assurance suggests that Argentina views this as a historic opportunity to establish itself as a major player in the Chinese market, potentially building a trading relationship that could last for decades. The implications point toward much deeper trade cooperation between China and Argentina in the future, potentially encompassing not just soybeans, but a broader range of agricultural commodities and even infrastructure investments, similar to what China has undertaken in Brazil. The impact of America's unsold soybean inventory extends far beyond immediate financial losses for this year's harvest. The more serious concern involves long-term market position. If international market share continues being captured by Brazil, Argentina, and other South American suppliers, the United States faces the very real possibility of permanently losing China, the world's largest soybean buyer. Once supply chains are reoriented, relationships are established, and infrastructure investments are made, reversing course becomes extremely difficult. Chinese importers and processors who have adapted their operations to work with Brazilian and Argentine suppliers will be reluctant to switch back without compelling reasons. The certification systems, quality control procedures, logistics networks, and financial arrangements that are currently being established create what economists call switching costs. The investments and efforts required to change suppliers become barriers to future change.